Okay, Madam Chair, we're ready to begin.
Thank you. Good morning. I'd like to call to order the September 23rd, 2020 LMO Committee Special Meeting on the town of Hilton Head Island. Teresa, are we in compliance with FOIA?
Yes, we are.
Thank you. And could you please call roll?
Certainly. Mr. Scanlon?
Here.
Mr. Theodore?
Here.
Ms. McGowan?
Here. Does staff have any changes to the agenda?
No, we don't.
Can I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
And a second, please?
Second.
If you have any changes when called upon, please state them. Otherwise, vote yay or nay to approve. Teresa?
Mr. Scanlon?
Yay.
Mr. Theodore?
Yes.
Ms. McGowan?
Yes. Teresa, do we have citizen comments for you to address?
Yes, ma'am. Public comments concerning today's agenda items were submitted electronically via the town's online portal. All comments from the portal were provided to the committee for review and made part of the official record. Citizens could also sign up to provide public comment during the meeting by phone. The sign-up period closed at noon yesterday, and we have one citizen on the line to give comments on the Historic Neighborhoods Preservation Overlay District.
All right, thank you. Item 6, unfinished business. This is the matter we started last week, the review of Historic Neighborhoods Preservation Overlay District. I'd like to ask staff if they want to make a presentation, particularly if there's any modifications based on our discussion last week, or if any additional information has come to light. Dr. DuBose, I see you're there. Good morning.
Good morning. Yes, ma'am. Sharice DuBose, for the record, I'd like to make some additional comments. The town hired a consultant to create a report of recommendations based on information they received from the Gullah Task Force and Native Island community. Town Council approved these recommendations along with a framework of top priority projects. Since this time, staff has worked in support of Town Council and the task force by working towards implementation of these projects. We started with the historic overlay, which was identified by the task force as being the most urgent. In working on this project, staff has identified several key recommendations, including increasing density, creating the flexibility and development standards by decreasing the widths to buffers, setbacks, and access, and increasing height and impervious cover, and including options for uses that consider the communal living traditions of Gullah landowners by including applications for family subdivision and family compound. There have been some concerns expressed at your last meeting about making access for family compound and family subdivision 20 feet wide, as recommended by the task force. Fire rescue and engineering have addressed the fact that having access less than 20 feet wide for family subdivision presents a safety issue. Additionally, the purpose for the 20 feet for a right-of-way is to include infrastructure, and the illustrations of what this will look like will be presented later in the meeting. Staff considered the information that was provided by the consultant in terms of what the need is to increase density in some of the areas of the historically zoned neighborhoods, zoned RM4, and proposed a new RM6 district, which was appropriate in that it still considered the historic integrity of historic neighborhoods while increasing density and allowing economic opportunities if that's the desire. Property that participates in the workforce housing program, which at most goes up to 60 U, would be entitled to an additional density bonus. LMO currently calls for rounding down when calculating density. To round up when calculating density in the HNPO district would not be appropriate for these areas or beneficial to everyone when considering the environmental sensitivity and preserving the historic integrity of these particular areas. The Marshfront District is located in the Marshland and Chaplin area. It's a narrow strip between the road and the marsh of Broad Creek. The reason Marshfront for major arterials, specifically on William Hilton Parkway, was created at less density, which is 4 DU, was for the purpose of safety because it's in proximity to major arterial. It also in consideration of headwaters of Broad Creek and the fact that this is an environmentally sensitive area, which is why this is zoned at a less density. Therefore, staff feels that 8 DU is too dense for that area and would like for the 6 DU to be considered. Additional concern is the removal of the 5-year restriction for selling the family compound to people outside the family. As discussed at the last meeting, the initial goal of the HNPO district is preservation. Please keep in mind that establishing a family compound and family subdivision is optional, and their creation should be made based on the goal of preserving property within Gullah families. When staff began working on these regulations, we did so with the goal of creating flexibility, creative site planning to honor families, and increasing density within the region appropriate for impacted areas. In discussions as to what this would look like, the proposal for the district has stretched beyond its intent established in the initial recommendations and created a complexity that would be detrimental to the people within the overlay. Please keep in mind, all issues do not have to be addressed right now in an effort to make the overlay perfect. We do need to get into reasonable aspects of what the overlay passed. We need to get into those reasonable aspects so that the people affected can take advantage of these amendments. It's better to start small, figure out what works or doesn't, and build from there. We don't want to be in a position where amendments need to be pulled back in the future. Also, staff would like to make 2 clarifications. First, home occupation has been removed from the HNPO amendments. There were just too many comments and questions concerning this section, and therefore there are no proposed changes to the current home occupation section within the LMO. Secondly, the proposed regulations go with the land and not with the property owner. If a person within an HNPO district sells their property to a person who is not a native islander, that person would still be entitled to the amendments that apply to the district. At the last meeting, you asked us to prepare illustrations for the 30-foot right-of-way. I will turn this over to Jeff Buckaloo to answer any questions regarding access. And I will be happy to answer any questions related to the overlay and the staff's additional concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. Why don't we get all the comments from the staff before we start asking questions? Is Jeff Buckaloo there? Would you like to go over the drawing that you submitted?
Yes, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay. Yeah, if they can put that up on the screen. We provided a graphic just representing a typical cross-section of the road surface. The LMO requires 20-foot width of road surface for two-way traffic to be maintained, minimum of 4-foot shoulders, and then to accommodate some kind of drainage there as we can, usually typically through swells and driveway pipes and things like that. So you can clearly see that 20-foot right-of-way would not allow for anything but the road surface to be installed. 40-foot is what the LMO requires for a small subdivision like this, and 30-foot would be the absolute minimum we could accept, and that's what we've stated in our dirt road acquisition and paving program.
Okay. Thank you. And
Yes.
is there anything that Ms. Pfister would like to add to the discussion on access? Is she available?
Yeah, I do not have anything else to add.
Great, thank you. Okay, why don't we run through the committee members with questions for staff. Mr. Scanlon?
The only question I have is if somebody is putting together a family compound or subdividing the property, is it all right for them to have built or put on the property a home and then rent it to non-family?
Staff?
A moment, let me check on that.
Alrighty.
Renting is perfectly fine. It still has to remain within the family, but to rent the parcel out, to rent the home out is fine.
Thank you.
Anything else, Michael?
That's it for right now. Thank you.
Okay. Todd Theodore, you have some questions for the staff?
Yeah. I was trying to understand, Therese, are there some positions that you had stated that the town has some concerns with the recommendations that the task force for this overlay district has prepared?
Yes, these have been stated before. Concerns about the access being too narrow. We have to allow for infrastructure to go in.
Okay.
Building too much on a small parcel, particularly in the marshfront districts, considering the environmental sensitivity, the headwaters of Broad Creek, the high traffic volume of Highway 278, we did discuss that we would like it to be, if we had to increase the density there, put it at 60U. At this point, we just feel that 8 is too much. In terms of rounding up, it would just, in addition to workforce housing density bonus, that would just puts too much stress on one parcel, particularly the smaller ones. So yes, these concerns have been addressed before, and so we're just trying to make sure we're making that heard before we continue along with this process.
Yeah, just for some reason, it just seems like it's getting a little louder. That it wasn't as pronounced as your introductory this time. So, are you saying also that some of the additions that we added to that boundary is outside of the consultant's recommendations?
Yes, when we constructed this this overlay district, when we worked on it, we referred to the recommendations that were made by the consultant, particularly with those areas that we were focusing on, the increased densities in areas that were appropriate, the adjustments to buffers and setbacks. We don't want to make it so that it causes problems for people who are trying to develop property in the future. And also, additionally, when we pulled the 5-year restriction from the family compound, I feel it's to the detriment of those. I feel it's to the detriment if you're trying to preserve those particular areas for Gullah families. It just makes it too easy to be able to sell it. And so those are the concerns that were expressed at the task force meeting, and we just want to make sure that those concerns are heard as we go forward.
Okay. So, and correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes.
It sounds like a fair amount of the modifications that our task force made to the overlay district different than the draft that the town prepared are items that you have listed?
I'm trying to understand that.
It almost feels like the areas where the town is sort of making a statement of some concerns are the changes that our task force, our Gullah Geechee task force recommended to modify the draft that was prepared by the town.
There were concerns with it when it was made, and it was mentioned in the task force meeting. We just want to make sure that they're heard throughout.
Yeah, I just want to make a point that the modifications that the town has, what you have outlined felt like it was almost all of the modifications that our Gullah Geechee task force recommended as modifications to the draft that the town prepared.
We are recommending to pull it back some.
Okay, I just want to make our group aware that what the town has outlined as concerns were some of the modifications that the Gullah Geechee task force edited of the town's draft. Just want to make sure that everybody's kind of aware of that for whatever reason. It just because it felt like some of all those adjustments that we made are now on the list of concerns that the town has as being too much. That's kind of the way I interpret it.
Yes, sir. And yes, sir. And that has been expressed before at the meeting.
I just want to make sure that just put that out on the table. And then
Yes.
Jeff, I had a question for you. When we talked the last time, there was discussions about two types of roads, a two-way and a one-way. Would there be a different profile if the road was one-way?
Yes, sir. The only way, as Joe Hyde had mentioned, that could occur if it was a looped road, if it had one way in and one way out from the development, and that was approved. And fire rescue requires a 14-foot, clear travel width for the one-way road.
So would we say in that case the right-of-way would be a 24-foot?
Looking at the shoulders, 14 plus 4-foot shoulders, that's 8, that's 22. If you needed some drainage swells, trying to split hairs there, 30, I think, is what is needed in most cases to accommodate a proper road infrastructure.
No, I understand. I'm just going to be devil's advocate and kind of address the comment about there were two types of roads, a two-way and then a one-way. And I'm looking at on your profile, the road surface says 20 feet for a two-way. If it was one-way, then it would be 14 feet, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So I'm just taking everything by a reduction of 6 feet. So I'm just asking the question is, could you do this same profile as a one-way road with a 24-foot right-of-way?
We could include that in this overlay district. Yeah, that's not a provision elsewhere in the LMO, but if the committee wished to do so, and there were proper access points, one way in, one way out, as I said, then I could see that being a viable option. Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to sort of bring that out. That would forever mean that road could never become two-way if everything was designed to the minimums.
Correct. Yes, sir. Without construction modifications, right?
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that. So, okay.
Okay.
That was my questions.
And from my standpoint, I think we would just need to make sure the wording that we make it clear that it can't be a dead end that you can only go in one way and not get out. So we just would need to make that the description or the wording very clear that there has to be two access points if you're going to use a one-way.
Sure.
Is that it for now, Todd?
Yes. Thank you.
I have a few questions and comments. To understand, it sounds to me that we're talking about I guess, four changes from what was initially submitted by staff. The first is talking about adjusting right-of-way width, and maybe having one for two-way and one for one-way. The rounding down versus rounding up, is that proposed to change for all the districts, or was that just the Marshfront district?
It's for all the districts within the overlay.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay, so that's the second one. And then the third was in the Marshfront district, the staff was stating 6 to the acre rather than 8 to the acre, correct?
Yes, on the Chaplain side of Marshfront, it's 4 DU. And it was proposed by the task force that the density of that area increased. However, it was when staff proposed 6 DU to kind of counterbalance that.
Okay.
Just the 8 DU is too much, staff feels.
Okay, just for that, it's just that district.
Yes,
The other overlay areas remain as proposed.
yes.
And then the last one is, I'm hearing you that there should be, you're suggesting there should be some kind of hold on the property for some period of time, so it's not an instantaneous ability to turn over the property to non-native islanders. Is that right? Right.
I think it should be considered, yes, to put some sort of way it's not easily sold.
Would something reducing that time frame be help to achieve that goal? Like, like a 1-year hold, for instance?
We can consider a 1-year hold.
All right. Now, so those are what I just went over is largely what staff is talking about, is changes from what's been brought before us. Is that right? Did I leave anything that you ran throughout?
Those are the 4, yes.
Okay. So then I just have another question. In the ordinance, adjacent use buffers are not required if new and proposed are in the same use classification. Does that mean that they're not required if residential's next to residential, or are they still required if one is a high density residential next to low density residential?
It's residential to residential, so there's no buffers required if they're both residential properties.
So you have an existing, I'm not sure if this is in existence, but if there's an existing single family development and we're increasing the density next to it, they're really not the same two uses next to each other. I mean, it seems like some sort of buffer would be appropriate between the two uses. We can talk about that, I guess. All right, that's my questions for now. We can take public comment. Teresa, is Philip Smith on the line?
Yes, Madam Chair, he is.
Okay, Mr. Smith, if you would like to address the committee, we have the requisite timer going for you. 3 minutes.
Good morning. Phil Smith, President Oak Marsh Property Owners Association. I have a few questions and comments. First, if the property is able to be transferred to a non-Gullah or Geechee native, do they still have to follow the laws that you are imposing, that it be held only in family property? So now can they only develop for their particular family, or do they have the rights to 4, 6, or 8 units per property and put anybody they want in there? Second, on the rentals, if you can rent the property, then they can put up 4, 6, 8 units on the property and rent to anybody they want, as long as it's in someone's family name. What I see here is the destruction of the Gullah heritage. We should be celebrating the Gullah heritage, and by doing so, keeping it in families. A better way to do this, eliminate property taxes. Reduce or eliminate property taxes. All this complications that we're throwing in here are leaving loopholes to terminate Gullah existence on this island, and it's horrible. I will make a bet with everybody on this board right now If you push all this through in 10 years, there will be very few gullas, if any, left on the island. We live in between great gullah heritage. We have graveyards around our neighborhood. We have beautiful businesses. Reduce the taxes on the businesses. Eliminate business taxes for true gullah heritage businesses, not ones that have popped up in the last 2 years that are environmentally destroying the island. Look at ways to work and not be complicated. It seems when it gets into here, you guys are trying to make it way more complicated with way too many loopholes to terminate gullah heritage on this island. And it's going to be awful, and it's going to benefit the few and eliminate the heritage. That's all I have to say today. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that will close the public portion. Committee members, comments, discussion. Mr. Scanlon?
Yeah, I'm going back to my earlier question about renting within the family compound. Would there be any restriction to selling some of these subdivided parcels to non-family members? In other words, do they have to hold it for 5 years or 3 years or 1 year? I think we need to pin that down as to, if you're going to start subdividing and selling off these smaller parcels inside a compound, I'd just like to know, how long the current holder of the property, must wait to do that, or do we want that to be flipped right away, or do we want to hold that 5 years or whatever? I'd just like to pin that down somehow.
Anything else, Mike?
That's it.
Todd?
I understand what Mr. Smith is saying, and I've always thought of that would be the direction that some of this would be headed. But I have to say, the results of this overlay district came out of a Gullah Geechee task force input. And so it's being really driven by the Gullah Geechee community. And at our last meeting, they were basically saying a lot of this is for economic opportunities for their land. So that's what kind of throws me off a little bit, because it does seem to create an advantage to sell and move on. But it was certainly driven, a lot of input was driven by the Gullah Geechee community. I don't know if Sharice, if you want to add to any of that. It seems like that a fair amount of this was input from the community itself.
Sharice?
That's correct. And we want to be able to put together an overlay that follows along with the recommendations that based on community input. We just want to do it within reasonable, we want to make it reasonable. So basically what I said at the end, to start off slowly, see what works, what doesn't, in a manner that it can be corrected if we're seeing things that do not work. If you go in too heavy, it's hard to be able to pull back from some of these things. So I think you need to proceed with caution on some of these amendments. That's pretty much, my position on that.
Madam Chair?
Go ahead, Mike.
In following up, what is the current recommendation out of the task force with regard to holding the property before being able to sell off sub-parcels or the whole parcel? Is there, what was it, a 5-year hold? Is that what originally the task force recommended?
Actually, it was recommended in the recommendations that there would be some sort of a 5-year. This was based off of Beaufort County's family compound and how they were doing it, and we made it a little less restrictive to how they did that. Task force is asked that that whole hold be removed.
The whole thing. So it could be flipped within 6 months.
Right now, as it's written, yes.
Okay. I just want to understand what we're doing. That's all.
Peter, did you want to inject any comments?
I kind of share the same concerns as Michael and Todd, and the speaker, Mr. Smith, that, we may be accelerating the sale of this property. Actually, there obviously is an economic benefit here, which will be taken advantage of, but was the objective of the task force to keep the land in the Gullah Geechee community and in the Gullah Geechee families? This kind of runs counterintuitive to that, and with that 5-year hold off, as Michael pointed out, it seems that is just going to accelerate the process, and some landowners may say, well, gee, this is an opportunity to upzone my property, increase its value, and then sell it off to a developer for a tidy profit, and then they're gone. And that property is no longer in the Native Island community. So, I think we need to go into this with our eyes wide open. Are we being true to the ultimate goal, or the overreaching goal of the task force, to maintain the Gullah Geechee heritage on the island?
Yeah, Madam Chair, a follow-up is I feel kind of the same way. I don't want to do anything that's going to hurt the community, but I just want to make sure that we're not. And I have nothing against making a profit. I mean, if we allow this, and the town council allows this to be no time limit, and you can flip it in 6 months. I mean, I have no problem with anybody making a profit on their real estate. But I just want to know: are we long term? Are we protecting or hurting the community?
Can I jump in here?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, this is Levon Stevens, chairman of the task force, just for the record. That particular item, as well as the other items, were kind of discussed at the task force level to give us, or to give the property owners some flexibility and options to choose what they would like to do with their property. As it stands right now, they can certainly sell their property. They have been selling their property. Some have been lost to, taxes and things like that. So I think what we were trying to do at the task force was to make sure that we gave the property owners an option or flexibility, again, as to how they want to use their property. We felt like the 5-year restriction was a little bit too much as far as telling folks what they can and what they would do with their property. I understand that it's a delicate balance between preservation, but at the same time, it is allowing people in these historic neighborhoods to have that option. If they want to sell, they're going to sell whether they're in the overlay district or not. And I do real estate. I've experienced that over the years as well, where we've been able to have people who sell property maybe from one family to another family, and it kind of stayed in the community. But then there have been folks who just wanted to sell anyway, and I think they feel like if we put this restriction on them, they don't have that option. That's how I understand it, if that helps any. And I do understand the intention of what we're trying to accomplish too, as far as preservation. But there's a delicate balance between that and the rights of what the people want to do with their property.
LeVarn, was there any concern raised by the task force that that this would accelerate the loss of Native Island ownership of property?
I don't think that there was any concern about that. That concern existed long before this item was even discussed. We've been losing property in those areas as it is to development and people who come in and some unsavory deals, such as it is. So other folks have benefited from the sale and development of those properties in those areas. That was not a part of our discussion, as I recall, at the task force.
Okay, and I understand that, but you know this seems to be the possibility of an accelerant to moving that property out of the family realm. And again, as Mike said, I'm not going to stand in the way of anyone making a profit on their property. I think that's great. But if the overriding goal was to keep the land in the native island families, are we being true to that goal? And is that if that is no longer a goal, it is just to increase the value and the profitability, then let's say that.
Yeah, and again, I think it was to give the landowners some flexibility and options as to what they choose to do with their property.
And given those circumstances, of possibly accelerating the sale of that property into non-native islanders' hands, those other issues of setbacks and roadways, it comes more into play, because then they would no longer be in the family, and now you may be subdividing those parcels, and need to have that infrastructure in place because it's no longer a family compound.
Bingo.
Yeah, understood. And again, I think that's some of the things that have already been happening even before we've been able to take action.
Maybe if, Madam Chair, maybe if the property is transferred outside the family within 5 years, then the buffers, setbacks, and access issues would revert back, and not be specialized for the compound.
Staff, any comments on that?
I wonder to some degree if it becomes a nonconformity, and then any future improvements would have to start bringing it back to a conformance.
Yeah, because most likely, Mike, if it's sold as raw land, then I see your point. But if it's already developed, obviously we're not going to ask the new owner to tear it down. It would be, as Todd said, it would be a nonconformity, and at some future date when the property is redeveloped, it would have to conform to a new standard.
Right. I'm talking about, the raw land, so to speak.
Yep. Understood.
Yeah, the trick would be, in some instance, if the front end of the property is developed and that's the access to a public right-of-way, what happens behind could, and sometimes in the future, be bottlenecked because of what happened in the front. It could be a real challenge, but those are the complexities that come out of this.
And Leslie, the other question I had is, someone raised the issue, and I forget which commissioner it was. If a native island property that's in the overlay district is next to a developed subdivision, is there consideration that there be an appropriate setback from that subdivision that's not part of the overlay district?
Yeah, right now there is, if a high density new development is next to a low density residential development, they're considered like uses with no buffers in this ordinance amendment, which they're not. They're kind of two different animals. That's easier to rectify than the 5-year hold.
There's actually a buffer between multifamily and single family, so there would be a buffer there.
Well, the language says adjacent use buffer is not required new and proposed are in the same use class. So you're saying then that two different densities are two different use classifications?
That's it. The two different use
Okay.
classification would require a buffer.
Okay, because when I asked that before, that wasn't the answer. So, but that, okay, so then that,
Just for clarification, the two different uses, so single family and multifamily are two different uses, but the different density within single family would not require it. So that was what we thought your question was before. So there could be low to moderate and moderate density in single family, and those would not have adjacent use buffer because they're both single family. But if you did single family next to multifamily, those are different uses, then you would have that buffer.
okay.
Well, can I ask this question? Right now, in between two residential subdivisions, what would be the buffer? What would be the buffer requirement?
Be zero.
Yeah.
That, case in point, I'll just use this as an example. Oak Marsh, which has been referenced a few times now, if 8 units to the acre develops next door to it, there's no buffer. So there is some conflicts there.
Well, when you say no buffer, Todd, it has to be some type of a setback.
Well,
Well, there is a setback, but there's no buffer.
Okay.
there's no planting
So it's whatever the setback is, that will be the distance between the two structures.
Correct.
that's right.
And there is a 20-foot buffer around two subdivisions.
Oh, there is on subdivisions,
Yes,
even within
around the exterior.
even
Okay,
within the overlay district. The proposed
Within
overlay.
well, you remember the PUD isn't in the overlay district, so the subdivision would have the 20-foot buffer around it.
Well, I'm going to use case in point is the Oak Marsh. Is if I own 5 acres next to Oak Marsh, can I do 40 units against that property without a buffer?
As it's
Hi, it's Terry Lewis. So it depends. So if you're doing 40 units as a family compound, that's considered single family. So it's single family adjacent to single family. If you're doing a multifamily development, then it's multifamily to single family, and that would require a buffer.
Yeah. So and that's you're answering my question is I could do 40 single family units on 5 acres, which are like I can't remember what an eighth of an acre lot against an existing residential community that might have half-acre lots
With no buffer.
with no buffer.
That's correct.
Yeah. So that's the flexibility, you know.
All right, let me circle back to just how do the committee members feel about the rounding down versus rounding up? Going back, amending that so that it's consistent with the rest of the code, which is a rounding down.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I am too, because you're talking about something that's within a half an acre of a unit.
Mm-hmm.
And I could understand somebody might be able to take advantage, I guess, of that if they subdivided, everything, maybe there's some way to protect it, that you subdivide so everything can round up or something. I don't know, but
Right.
that seemed to have in the Carolyn McVitie especially thought that was a great recommendation to add to this overlay district.
However, staff is, and I tend to support the idea, is advocating going back to being consistent to the rest of the code, which is rounding down. Then
Can I make a comment?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
I can't see you, Levon. That's why I don't know.
That's okay. I appreciate it. I'm just listening in. I'm actually in 2 meetings.
Okay.
The suggestion that Ms. McVitie had made about rounding up was so that we had some, again, that property owners could get a little bit more use out of the acreage that they had, as well as some fractional properties as well. And I think to what I hear the committee saying is that this is an overlay district, so it's not necessarily trying to be consistent with the rest of the code. It's given that option too, and that's why it's an overlay, and that's an overlay item. That's how I understood it.
All right.
And that's where I interpret it as well, that there's an underlying district and then the overlay modifies that underlying district.
Staff want to comment on that?
Yes, ma'am. Just wanted to clarify that the reason why we had some concerns is because we agree with Levon in terms of building in flexibility and increasing density, and that's why we proposed the change from RM4 to RM6. Plus, we know that workforce housing is working on a similar track, and you'd be able to take advantage of that as well if interested. So there's another density increase. Then if you have just 1.01 acres, all of a sudden you're bumping up into another density increase, and suddenly when you start compounding all of these, it's a significant amount of density in an area that may or may not be able to handle that. So we want to be flexible. We want to give some increase to allow that additional use of the property, because we understand that economic value of land, but not going so far as creating a condition where either, number one, people won't be able to take advantage of it because they can't actually fit that much stuff into their box, or that it creates a problem for the neighbors outside the overlay, the neighbors in the overlay. You could be in the overlay and not have any desire. You've been living there forever on your property, and all of a sudden your neighbor is increasing the density right there around you. So just having a little bit of a balance. And when Sharice referenced kind of starting small and being able to grow, you all know very well that we do LMO amendments every year. So there's no reason why we couldn't do RM4 to RM6, plus the flexibility and performance standards with the buffers, setbacks, et cetera, and then see how it goes. And if it's not having the desired effect and it's still not enough density, and the LMO committee and planning commission, town council, the task force all agree, then create an amendment to go up higher versus lumping it all in at one time. So we're not opposed to the increased density. We just are trying to explain why it's compounding. Also, the level of complexity that's being created. One of the concerns we hear a lot is how complex the LMO is, how hard it is to understand the rules. And now we're creating more and more rules. And if it's in this area, you do this, but in this area, you do that. And kind of caught me when Mr. Scanlon said, well, and then if you sell, do you go back? And you're just creating not only for staff interpreting and working with property owners, but the property owners themselves trying to understand what they can and can't do. And there is some benefit to simplicity. So
I have to correct you, Jennifer, in terms of my interpretation of the task force was, if a lot was a half acre or greater, you round up, not 0.01. If you were less than half acre, you round down. If you're
that's
above
correct.
half acre, you round up.
okay, well, that's good to know, because when the conversation started, that was, and Ms. McVitie brought it up. I believe, Todd, you were the one that talked about the half acre rounding up versus under that rounding down. But I think because we had so many meetings, by the time we got to the end, the actual motion said to round up, period. It didn't specify that it was only for the half. So staff is looking at that as a whole lot of property ready to round up. And just like someone mentioned, you could very well plan to subdivide and craft it so that each one is getting advantage of that rounding up. And so you can see why we were concerned that all of a sudden that's a lot of extra density on top of the RM4 to RM6, and with the other flexibility is going to allow more people to take advantage of it. So if you're talking about half acre or more rounds up, and under that, rounds down, then that's more palatable from staff standpoint.
Well, that was my interpretation through our conversations, and maybe we just forgot to add, the half acre round up.
It's still an increase, but that will keep it to potentially more manageable level than just having that barely a fraction going all the way to a whole nother unit. So.
Correct.
Yeah,
Okay.
I would echo what Todd is saying, and just the definition of the word rounding up, is what that is. It's not like 0.1, 1.1 acres round up. If you have to get to that half an acre, if it's 0.6 or 0.7 or 0.8, then you could round up.
Yeah, so based on this conversation, if the LMO committee decides, like in a recommendation, staff can go back, because right now the definition in the draft amendments you got says all density within the overlay would be rounded up, and we can modify that before it goes to planning commission to say if it's 0.5 or greater, then it would round up. So we can make that change before the next round of review.
And I would add one more point, if I could.
Yep.
That we're rounding the Marshfront District up to RM6, I believe, and there are other areas in the overlay district that have more density than that, and so that's still just like a medium compromise around getting that up to RM6.
Yeah, I think
Just to clarify, it's not going to RM6. It would still be marshfront, so it would still allow the other rules and regulations within marshfront. It would just be a higher density, just so that we're all on the same terms.
Yeah, we just need that clarification.
so. What would it be? The new designation for this overlay?
Just like in the amendments that we drafted, it'd still be marshfront, just where it says it's 4 DUs an acre if it's on the arterial. The task force recommended going to 8 DUs if it's on the arterial. Staff thought 6 would be a better.
Okay. That's what I thought.
A better way, but it'd still be marshfront. We're not recommending changing it from marshfront to to RM4 or RM6.
Mm-hmm.
Jennifer, just for clarification, when we're talking about marking it up or rounding it up, if someone has a half acre parcel, what would it be rounded up to?
It'd be 1
Well,
acre.
if you're 6 DUs an acre and you have half acre, if you round down, you get 3. If you round up, you would get to 4. Am I doing that right? Where's the definition in the definition? Hold on just a minute. Let me just check. I don't want to quote it wrong.
It rounds up to the nearest. It would round up to the nearest whole number.
It would round up to the nearest whole number.
All right, so give me a practical example. If I have a half acre lot and it's zoned what?
If a half acre lot is zoned RM6,
you would get under .5.
Then you would get 3 to use
Under the point.
under the 0.5.
All right, so you'd be allowed to put 3 units on that half
On
acre
that
parcel?
half acre.
Okay, and if it was just a half acre, what would you be allowed to do?
So you-
Sorry, I'm not a math on the fly
I'm not-
person. I got a lot of skills, but this isn't one. That's why I'm looking over to somebody with, oh, Sean, there's my math guy.
All right, Sean, can you give me a practical example of if the half acre lot under whatever zoning we're applying to it, what it would be allowed to do, and if it was rounded up, what would you be allowed to put on that half acre parcel as far as number of units per acre?
Yeah, I'll do my best to try to provide some clarification. I guess the issue with using half acre, if it's RM4, that's 4 units an acre, half an acre, you get 2. There's no rounding. Same with 6, you'd get 3 units under that. Or RM8, you'd end up with 4. But let's go back to this. If you go from an RM4, which is roughly quarter acre lots to accommodate 1 unit, to an RM6, which allows 1/6 of an acre lots per unit. If you had that same quarter acre scenario, which you would need for the 4 units per acre, under an RM6, each one of those quarter acre lots would allow 1.5 units, right? So 4 times 1.5 gets you to 6. If you round up all of those quarter acre lots, in essence, you've created an RM8 district, right? So each quarter acre lot under 6 units an acre would give you 1.5 per lot. If you round it up, you end up with 2 per lot, in effect 8 in that same acre. And so I think that was some of the concern with the cumulative effect of rounding up. In essence, you're creating RM4 to RM6, and if you round up, you're going to an RM8. Even with the clarification that it has to be a half acre or more, you're still getting that same cumulative effect. Does that answer some?
Well, yes and no. Now you've probably confused everybody more. If I have a half acre lot,
Yep.
okay, and whatever overlay we're going to do on that, Sean, we're going to make it from RM4 to RM6. Is that the proposal?
Correct. You'd go from 2 units to 3 on that half
Okay,
acre.
so we're RM6 means you can do 6 units per acre, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so on a half acre, you'd be allowed to put 3 units on it.
Correct.
Okay, now if I round up, okay, what do I round that half acre up to? Do I round it up to a full acre?
Well, no, you're at a whole number, right? Half acre at 6 units an acre give you 3 whole units.
Okay, but so how is there any advantage if I get 3 on a half acre lot, and if it's rounded up, I get 3 on a half acre lot?
There's no advantage unless you subdivide it into 2 1 acre lot or quarter acre lots. And now each one of those quarter acre lots under RM6 is allowed 1.5, right? And if you round up each one of those lots, now you have potential to do 2 per lot. So there is some complexity. And I think Jennifer mentioned, I think you could have some creative subdivisions that would get you to that threshold where the rounding up would add additional units on potentially several properties.
All right, and Sean, would the subdivision still have to comply with all the other conditions as far as, spacing between units and fire codes and setbacks, et cetera, et cetera? So even if it's rounded up, they physically may not be able to fit with the other restrictions.
Yeah, I'll let Terry try to answer that question. If we're talking about, I own a half acre lot and I subdivide it into 2, and I sell one of those lots or both of those lots. It's not a major subdivision. And so I'll let Terry factor in how the density would be impacted there. But, each one of those lots that normally under RM4 would be allowed 1 unit, would be, if you round it up, would have the potential to have an additional unit as an option on that site.
Thank you, Sean.
Yeah.
Yeah, I almost wonder if, when in some instance, when the discussion was brought up in the Gullah Geechee task force about rounding up, I think maybe we were short-sighted and not thinking about a half-acre lot. We were thinking about 10 acres.
Right.
And so a half-acre roundup is not as impactful. And maybe the other question is, what's the purpose of the Gullah Geechee or this overlay preservation district? You know, does it continue on? Can I continue to keep subdividing and then those rules keep applying towards the new parcel? Or is it based on a fixed what's existing to date? And that applies to the land as it's parceled out to date, because it does get very confusing. I'll just keep subdividing based on the advantages of these opportunities to round up or something like that. It can get really complicated.
Well, it goes with the zoning goes with the land.
Yeah. It seems like to me that part of this overlay district is to try to create opportunities and preservation opportunities for what's out there today. I don't know. It just, like I think what Sean was saying is I could keep subdividing my land so that I'm always having the opportunity to come back and round up. I can keep rounding up, and I'm not sure that is necessarily the intent. The intent is to take the boundaries that are defined today and see what the opportunities are.
Yeah, I think that a lot of time and effort has gone to creating these up zones, and they are somewhat predictable. But to add the rounding up feature in, we have no idea what you're going to yield and what impact you're going to have. In my opinion, it's prudent to leave it the way it is right now, because there are a lot of other provisions here that are enhancing the developability and profitability of the land.
I think I agree with you on that now, that kind of sort of shining a light on all the complexities.
How it applies, yeah. So that circles back to the some period of time of a hold on the land, whether to include a 5-year hold or less. My opinion is there should be something, because I don't want to negatively impact the neighboring Native Islanders, and with an instantaneous bonus to developers, I'm afraid we're going to hasten loss of properties where, I don't know if even a 1-year hold will do that, but maybe in some instances it'll give a landowner pause, and if a developer is interested, they'll work out a contract, and or perhaps economic conditions will change and the land will be saved. What are the other members' feelings on that matter?
I would give you my opinion of being on the task force. Always thought there would be some type of time restriction to be able to take advantage of the opportunities. And I think as this thing has gone along, there's been sort of these interim additions of trying to lessen some of those restrictions. It almost feels like, this is a great opportunity to sell out, to take full economic opportunity, and it's going to speed the process up. And I've heard complaints in the past that some of the actions the town had taken had increased that degradation of the Gullah Geechee community. And it feels like, even though our task force, was really driven by the community, it does run the risk of speeding the process of selling the land.
and having people move off the island, which is
Yeah.
not the goal at all. Mike?
Well, I tell you, it's a conundrum. I'm thinking maybe 3 years, and if you sell it or do it before 3 years, then you don't get the setbacks and all that other stuff. That's kind of where I'm coming out right now. You can go ahead and sell your property right away, but you're not going to get all the benefits of the restriction, reduced restrictions and stuff on the buffer setbacks and that sort of thing.
Do we have an ability to move forward to some sort of motion to send this up to the Planning Commission after, obviously, some amendments? Crickets.
I'd like to hear what LaVon has to say about what I just said about a 3-year thing. And if you hold it 3 years, then you get the benefit of these moves. If you don't hold it 3 years, you don't get the benefit of the setbacks and buffers and that sort of thing.
Sure. And again, I will express what I said before about the flexibility and the option of the property owner to do what they will with the property. In our discussion at the task force level, we felt like any restriction at all would take away the choices that the property owners would make. Those properties historically are ongoing. We're losing property anyway to people who are selling. And I feel like that restriction would be kind of heavy-handed from the town. It's hard to speculate what someone might do or what they might not do, but to put something in place to tell them that they can't do that for 3 years or they're going to be
Not
somehow.
saying that, LaVon. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying they can turn ahead. They can sell it the next month, and they would be operating under current restrictions. Okay, but if they hold it 3 years, they get the benefit of the other things that we're going to be providing. It's totally up to the landowner. They can sell it the next day. It's just that they have to operate under current conditions,
Can I make a clarification about the family compound? Again, taking advantage of family compound and family subdivision is optional. It's only the family compound that has the restriction on it, or the proposed restriction that we're discussing. The family subdivision, if you sell to someone outside the family, you would go to the regular subdivision regulations. But it's the family compound that's proposed to have the hold on it.
Yeah, if
Why,
you're going to keep
why,
it in the
Levon,
family.
why would that be a restriction? Because the family compound is really set up to support the culture of land ownership in the Gullah Geechee community. I mean, that's part of preservation.
Yes. So you wouldn't need that restriction.
Well, no, I mean, if you divide it, if you create a compound, and I'm trying to understand this, if the compound is without a designated infrastructure and boundary lines that define what a normal kind of subdivision is, right? I mean, so it's all under a common ownership.
It's one parcel. A family compound is one parcel with several homes on it, as opposed to subdivision where you subdivide the land and into several parcels. So if someone decides that they're going to sell this parcel after a couple of months, then I don't see how that would be a way to preserve it and keep it within the family. I think that would be that goes against what we're trying to do and trying to keep it in Gullah families. So that's why the 5-year hold restriction was suggested in the beginning, not only with our report, but it was within the consultant report, and it's also with Beaufort County's family compound.
And Doctor, how many, what were the zoning restrictions, if any, on a family compound?
It's whatever the base district is. So you could have a family compound in an RM6 district, Mitchellville, wherever, it's whatever the base zoning is. So you would adhere to that.
Okay, and would the family compound be subject to the upzoning because it's in the overlay district?
It depends on what it's initially zoned. So if the compound is in an RM4 district, then it would be proposed to be rezoned to RM6. So compound can go into any zoning district within the overlay.
And the compound is designed to house family members, sons,
Yes.
daughters, grandma, grandpa, aunts, uncles, that type of situation.
Yes.
Correct?
On a single parcel of land, yes.
All right, and there could be multiple owners of that single parcel of land among the family members.
Yes.
And that kind of drives me to say, maybe there should be some type of restriction on it, because if you get one or two family members who want to go in one direction and sell it, and you have an argument among the family, or I don't want to say an argument, a debate among the family about whether to sell because they can take advantage of a higher value for the property, that, as Mike proposed, maybe not 5 years, but 3 years, is kind of a cooling off period, where folks can, hold on to their land, take a deep breath, and since it is a family compound, keep it in the family a little bit longer.
Give them some time to work it out.
Yeah, I like the idea of a cooling off period, so to speak.
I mean, I'll put that in a motion if you want me to.
And again, just for the record, I would state that what we discussed at the task force was not to have any restrictions on those properties, especially even in a family compound situation. There's a delicate balance between preservation and the flexibility that we're trying to offer folks as far as land use and how they use it.
But LeVarn, if you're offering someone a bonus, I mean, it needs to be some type of a opposite consideration, and just holding on to it for a couple of years, seems to be a valuable trade-off to get a much increased value of the parcel of land.
Yeah, like I said, I'm just stating what we've talked about at the task force.
I know where you're coming from. I get it. I get it.
And the input that I get from the community.
And I go back to the overriding. What we're trying to do is preserve the Gullah Geechee culture and keep the land in the hands of the family. And right. That's just seems to be what is gnawing at me, that I don't want a mass exodus of Native Island families from their property.
Right.
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah.
I was going to say, I've been in a lot of real estate conundrums before, and I always remember a very famous line: "You can't always get what you want, but if you try sometimes, you get what you need." If you need the family compound, then we're providing a way to do that, giving you some benefits. You hold on to it for 3 years. The family decides they don't want it anymore, they're fine. They can go. But if they don't want to declare it a family compound, then they just kind of have to operate like any other subdivision, sale and subdivide would be.
Yeah, and again, I think we have to provide some flexibility for people to use the property as they would see fit.
Well, they get the choice.
And And the preservation piece is, yes, we are certainly concerned about preservation, but it's almost like saying that we're going to put these things in place to help you preserve your property, whether you want to or not. And
Totally up to the landowner.
well, any kind of restriction feels like, it's a little overreaching.
It's a give and a take. It's a give and a take.
I kind of equate it, Levon, to having your cake and eating it too.
Right.
Pretty much like what we've been doing. Pretty much like we've been doing with the history of the town as it is.
Well, but I think the idea of the preservation side of this is the family compound, and there's no right-of-way requirements. The infrastructure can come in and in a different format than what would happen in a subdivision. But if you sell off, then all of a sudden you've established a fabric of development that is conflicting with, basically a subdivided piece of property, but it's not really subdivided anymore. And the infrastructure, there's no right of way, so you're perpetuating the problem into the future that, been trying to mitigate in sort of current conditions today. And it's really, it's that family compound is the one that's giving an opportunity to continue to provide real estate opportunities, homes for future generations of the Gullah Geechee community. And that incentive to preserve probably has to have a time restriction to take advantage of it. Otherwise, you can take advantage of the subdivision route.
So, Mr. Scanlon, did I hear you say something about a motion? I'm sorry.
I would move that. Well, go ahead. If there's more discussion, please go ahead.
I have one more question about the Marshfront district as well. I think Jennifer said something earlier, and I just want to make sure I'm clear on how that Marshfront zoning is defined or how it works.
Dad?
Levon, what's your question? I was just clarifying because I think you said that Marshfront would go to RM6, and we're not proposing to change it from Marshfront to a residential, to the RM6. We're proposing to increase the density in the Marshfront category. So district, you would still get the same benefits, land uses that you get in Marshfront. We don't want to take that away. We were just saying that the density in that area of the island going to 8 was extreme for the conditions, but not to change, the allowable uses within that area.
Yeah, and I guess going to the 8 would be, again, as we just said, about making some sort of compromises as compared to some of the other areas on the island that are have more density or have, a little bit more use or flexibility because of the increased density.
I think
totally understand, and that's when Sharice explained a little bit today and a lot at the last task force meeting that density, the land use plan and where density goes isn't just based on we would like to have it. We have to take into account a lot of factors, and there are other areas of the island that have higher density because of the conditions in that area. So this condition with Marshfront has the headwaters of the Broad Creek are a very ecologically sensitive area. We have the curve in the road there as you come to that section of Marshfront along 278. The size of the area, the high level of traffic in that area, the proximity of RD across the street. We just had to look at a lot of factors. It's not just, I would like to have more. And we get that. And that's a natural, request. And so we think there could be some compromise to get a little bit more. but staff was just concerned about going to RM or to zoning it up to 8, still in marshfront, because we don't think the land in that area can carry that it wouldn't be good for the development of that area. That's what we were trying to say. We understand that there's that balance and the desire to have more. That's why initially I think our gut says it's right where it is right now, but understanding that desire that maybe it could go from 4 DUs to 6 in that section. And we were just wanted to make sure y'all were aware that we have some concerns about going to 8. But, we know that's the task force's desire. So the LMO committee and planning commission and council will all have to take that up. We just didn't want to keep going without letting you know the concerns that we had, so that we were all on the same page.
Yeah, and I guess my hope was that we would have been able to take care of a lot of this before it even got to the LMO committee, that we maybe would have been able to get this done last week. If we had those kind of concerns, we could have addressed them at the task force level. I will say that generally speaking, overall, again, and I'm speaking as a representative of what I hear as far as feedback from the community and from some of my associates in the task force, we're kind of operating from behind the history, if you will. So I think that's why folks are asking for as much as they're asking for. We're not asking for something for nothing. It's just trying to catch up with the rest of what's been happening around us as far as development of the town and the way that other areas have been developed and the way other people have been able to take advantage of properties around these historic neighborhoods. Yes, I understand everything you're saying, but it just feels like when it comes to folks trying to do something with their property, then they're kind of limited and feel like there's so many restrictions. So yes, we're going to ask for the moon. You may not be able to always get what we want, but we can certainly ask for it and try to work for it. And when we look at other things and see that other people are being able to develop major developments that are impacting our island and impacting the areas as well, we look at that and say, well, why can't we do the same? So that's where a lot of these concerns are coming from.
Madam Chair?
Michael, go ahead.
Would, Levon, would it be in the interest of getting it right, would you like to take back what we've said here today to the task force and come back at us again at some later date so that they understand the discussion and might be willing to hammer out some things that would be amenable to all?
I'm not sure that I would want to do that. I would like to see us keep going forward if we can, and between last week and today, if we can hammer it out and get to something that's digestible to move it forward and let the planning commission and maybe even town council work it out. If they want to send it back, that might be okay. I think we're real close.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're real close. And understanding we may not get everything that we asked for, but that's why I want to give you that history of why we're asking for a lot of those things.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if I want to go backwards.
Levon, staff doesn't want to go back. Yeah.
I don't want to go back.
And it took 3 or 4, probably 4 meetings, Levon, with the task force to work through all this.
Yeah.
Staff brought a lot of information. They had a lot of good questions. We went back and forth trying to get to the same page. We brought up our concerns at that time, but just like this group can do, the task force made the recommendation. They made the motion. That's what we brought to you. Y'all can make a motion, and it's okay if we don't agree, but it's our responsibility to let the next group know where our concerns lie and why, from a planning standpoint, we have those concerns. But we'll take forward what this group recommends. Just so I know y'all might not care about how the sausage is made, but when it goes to planning commission, there's a lot of notification that has to happen. We have 3 applications. There's the text amendments and there are 2 zoning map amendments. There are over 8,000 envelopes that are currently in the process of being addressed, folded, stamped, put out for next week to meet our deadline for
I
that
get it.
planning commission meeting. And
I get it. The baby's on our doorstep, okay? I get it.
But Michael, I think it's important that you made that suggestion and LaVarn heard it, and the members of the task force are aware that that was an option that was offered. And I agree with LaVarn and with staff that we need to move this forward, that we've talked
Yes.
about it for a very long time. There's a recommendation, and just like any piece of legislation, it is sausage, and we will come up with something, and may not get everything in the sausage factory, but I think we need to move forward with what we have.
Fair enough.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
since we're using the sausage language, I hope that this group and the experts at staff and, we depend on you guys because you're the experts with testing these things out and giving us some good feedback on how it's made. So as far as making the sausage, please use a high grade of meat.
I think it should be vegan sausage. So
Madam Chair,
back to Mike, where you were.
may I make a motion then?
Yes, please.
That we forward this to the town council, to the full planning commission, with the suggestion that there be, if a parcel is declared a family compound, that they are entitled to the reductions in buffers, setbacks, and access, and the impervious cover and the like, and building heights, and that be fixed for a period of 3 years, after which time, if the family does no longer want it to be a compound, it can be sold subject to regular subdivision regulations.
And any other amendments as part of that?
What
Motion.
about the roundup?
Yeah, I think that we reached a consensus to omit that section.
I would agree. I would accept that as a friendly amendment.
And the other possible amendment was the changing of the marshfront districts down to 6 units per acre.
I mean, I'll accept that as an amendment as well to move the motion to the full planning commission.
Okay, and I'm sure that will be further
Did we need to-
discussed.
Did we
Excuse
need
me,
to
and
address the road
access?
right away?
Yeah,
Yes, we do.
That roadway right away would be 30 feet?
For two-way, and were we discussing a 24-foot wide for one-way?
For one way, correct. I would accept those as friendly amendments as well.
Okay.
I have a question.
Who's talking? Yes,
That's
go ahead.
fine. So with those right-of-ways being, am I understanding it would be 30 feet?
30 feet for
two-way.
two-way and 24 foot for one-way.
And would that still impact the acreage of the property? Or could that be discounted from impacting the total acreage of the property?
Impact the acreage.
Excuse
I'm
me?
sorry?
The acreage would remain the same, doesn't impact that.
Okay, so the calculation's done on the gross.
Madam Chair, do I have a second?
Actually,
I'll second.
Todd Theodore has seconded the motion. Staff, roll call, please.
Yes, Madam Chair. Mr. Scanlon,
Yes.
Mr. Theodore,
But before, I guess I'll have to ask another question. Did we, and I don't know what the solution would be, is there a buffer concern? You know, like kind of what I brought up?
Between developments, you mean?
It's kind of, yeah.
Yeah, I guess the input that's needed, you're saying in your knowledge of the island that there are areas where you have a lower density that could end up with a high density next to it, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm in favor of some kind of reduction in the buffer standard, but it seems for the livability, there should be something.
Well, we do have one for the family compound, already, a reduction. But if
Right.
it's not declared a family compound, then it's subject to, regular subdivision regulation.
Or I think there's reduced buffer standards in here anyway, right?
Sure.
So those could
There-
apply. So those could apply in that, should that situation come up.
Is there,
Correct.
because I thought the
That's correct.
conversation was if it was residential, single family against single family, there's no buffer.
Right,
Sing-
and
family,
so that's a change that Mike's talking about, is that it would, the language of that would be revised so that they would apply.
Apply to a
That's it.
family compound.
Okay, all right. All right, so I'll vote yes.
All right. Risa?
Madam Chair, staff needs a little more clarification on the reduced buffer standards. Is that between the same uses?
Yes.
And what are those standards? 10 feet? We're
Well,
just
yeah.
trying to gather what the committee is looking for.
Okay. You have standards for a buffer for family compound, is that correct?
That's my motion, yes, that they be reduced. According to the document that they forwarded to us on the historic neighborhood.
Do you have the page number for that, Mike?
Well,
Madam Chair,
Yes.
currently under the current LMO, the buffer distance between single family to single family uses is 10 feet?
A minimum of 10.
Is a minimum of 10 feet.
Okay. And it's required to be planted?
Yes, yes.
So is there a way, Todd, do you have a feel for how wide you'd like the buffer to be?
Well, I would think it would at least be 10 feet.
Okay.
I'm getting a little confused. In what situation was the buffer 0?
Residential, abutting residential. So,
Under the proposed amendments, residential to residential.
but if it's single family to multifamily, there is a buffer requirement.
There is, yes.
But if single family to single family, if you have, half acre single family next to eighth of an acre single family, there is no requirement.
There's no buffer requirements between two single family, yes.
Okay. So, kind of when I referenced before, next to Oak Marsh, which is an existing residential community, and if I own land adjacent to it, I could build right up to it without a buffer.
Yes.
Okay. And is that, Therese, and I don't know if somebody else there could answer, is that an existing, is that under the current LMO, or is there a buffer requirement?
It's under the proposed amendments.
But if you're not under the proposed amendment and you're residential to residential, there would be a buffer, correct?
That's correct.
That would be a 10-foot buffer?
Yes.
Yes. Terry's not clarifying.
Right, so right now, if you're developing a single family subdivision, then there's a requirement for a 20-foot exterior subdivision buffer. And so we eliminated that with the proposed flexibility that's being provided in the overlay. What I was trying to get at, what Teresa was asking for, was just some direction. If you are going to propose that there be a buffer between single family and single family, we would just like some direction on what you would like that buffer to be. The minimum 10 foot, which is what we were trying to do when we looked at other buffer requirements and providing flexibility. We were trying to choose the minimum buffer requirements as well as the minimum planting requirements. So, but we want to bring back to the Planning Commission what the LMO committee is recommending, and we don't want to guess at what that number would be.
Barry, if I could ask you your thoughts, if I'm in this overlay district and say I have 10 acres and I abut an existing residential community that's already been established, do you sense a conflict if I come in and I take advantage of the 8 units, say, to the acre, and I abut that against that residential community without a buffer?
Well, it's still single family to single family, because if you think about the Oak Marsh subdivision, I don't know how many homes are in there, so I can't guess necessarily at what they're, they may be developed at 4 units per acre, they may be developed at 8 units per acre, since it's an older subdivision. So you still have a residential subdivision adjacent to a residential either subdivision or a family compound. So it's still single family to single family. And keep in mind that as we were drafting these amendments, we were looking for ways that we could provide flexibility and still keeping in mind, trying to keep in mind that we wouldn't be creating conflict. So we looked at single family residential adjacent to single family residential as not being a conflict between those two uses.
Yeah, I think I was, in thinking more of, say, you got half acre against an 1/8 acre. Mm-hmm. And, so you may have a little bit more of a rural kind of character, and then all of a sudden you have sort of an urban character, because there's no buffer anymore. So I don't know. I'm really kind of relying on your experience and what you have seen in terms of, the community input and the concerns and that kind of stuff as things evolve and develop. But if you don't see a concern with it, then that's fine. I was just wondering if, how that might play out.
I think that we see, especially both older and newer subdivisions, we see subdivisions adjacent to each other that don't have a buffer between them, and even subdivisions between each other that it was a buffer at one time, but kind of has morphed into somebody's backyard. Yeah. So that essentially you don't, you've got everything kind of adjacent to both subdivisions, but it's still a residential neighborhood adjacent to a residential single family neighborhood adjacent to another residential single family neighborhood.
Okay, well, I'm kind of relying on your experience and how that, through history, how that, the input has been. So thank you for that.
Okay, so the motion's been modified again. So do we need to revote or?
Yeah, I would think so.
Why don't we run through the roll call again, Teresa?
Sure. Mr. Scanlon.
Yes.
Mr. Theodore?
Yes.
Ms. McGowan?
Yes. All right. So moving on to new business, which I believe is business. Yes, Levon.
I would just give you some final comments. I'm happy that we're moving something forward, but I will say that I am a little disappointed from what we talked about, again, at the task force level, where we had kind of worked out these nuts and bolts. And at the time, it seemed like we had a pretty good consensus And now, once again, there's all these concerns that I think should have been worked out at another level, and certainly with the expertise that we have on our staff. So I just want to state that for the record, that we're still trying to figure out how to do things creatively and with some flexibility and provide some options. But at the same time, I know we might not get everything that we want, but we still seem like we're fighting from behind. We're always playing catch up and not being able to quite catch up.
Thank you,
Madam Chair, as the person who put forward the motion, I just want to make it clear that if the purpose of this overlay is to allow families the opportunity to set up a compound, we've done nothing but try to help in that regard. If the purpose is to develop a subdivision or to sell the land for the development of a subdivision, then that's permitted, the very next day. And you can, I just don't see how we're standing in the way of progress here with this motion. And that's the only reason I put it forward. Let's get it in front of the full planning commission and we can take another look at this stuff. And I might even change my mind at some point. But right now, the way I think we can move the process along is let's take it with this motion on up to the planning commission.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, I think that there's going to be, as staff said, there's going to be a lot of public notice, and I feel better bringing to the planning commission with some of these provisions there. We can air it out and see where it goes, but it's probably good compromises when you got people arguing on both sides. So, and lastly, the LMO is a dynamic document, so not that I want to see us amending it all the time, but certainly these are going to be closely watched provisions when they are finally enacted. But I appreciate your participation, Levon.
Well, thank you for the work that you're doing and moving these things forward. I just had to express my true feelings.
All righty. So, under new business, we have review of dirt road paving LMO amendments, which I'm assuming are kind of related to what we've just gone through. Would staff like to make a presentation on this? Terry?
Yes, ma'am. Terry Lewis for the record. Yeah, so we will talk a little bit. You'll see that 30-foot right-of-way as we go through these amendments. We'll talk about that a little bit, similar to what you just discussed as part of the overlay district changes. But the town has had a program in place to accept donations of public road right-of-ways on qualifying private unpaved roads. And the goal is to both pave those dirt roads, provide better access for emergency vehicles as well as the residents off of those streets, and then also to provide publicly maintained infrastructure within these rights of ways. So when the town takes on a dirt road and creates a right of way and paves it, we not only put in infrastructure, but we also maintain that from that point forward. And so in an effort to start working through this process of paving the dirt roads, we held several meetings with residents in areas where the dirt roads would be paved, find out their thoughts and concerns related to the paving. And some of the main concerns that we heard were related to density, the size of the right-of-way, and setback and buffer requirements. So staff took those concerns back and looked at the LMO and looked for ways that we could make changes to the existing requirements to both allow the paving of the rights of way, to allow the creation of those rights of way, the paving and the infrastructure installation, while still preserving density and the development potential off of those roads. And so what we did was we added language to the districts where the roads would be proposed to be paved, and those are the RM4. We've put in RM6. I drafted these with the idea that RM6 would be adopted so that we wouldn't have to go back after the fact. and add that back in. So RM4, RM6, RM8, RM12, the Marshfront District, Mitchellville, Neighborhood Commercial, Stony, and Waterfront Mixed-Use Zoning Districts. And the language there states that parcels along a right-of-way in those districts that's acquired as part of the town's dirt road paving program would be permitted to develop to the density potential that existed prior to the establishment of the right-of-way. And if you think about this, kind of this goes back to the question that was asked by Mr. Stevens earlier. If somebody wants to develop a property and they have to put right-of-way, how does that impact the density? Well, at that point, when you're coming in to do a new subdivision, it's based on the gross acreage, not once you take it out. So we decided we would treat these subdivisions, many of which are much older, kind of that way, that if it were coming in as a brand new subdivision today, you wouldn't take out that right-of-way from the amount of density potential that's available. So what we would do is we would grandfather that. So if you could do 3 homes today, and then when you gave the bit of land for the right-of-way, you could only do 2, you would still be able to do 3 when you came in to develop or to add density to that parcel. We also added language about setbacks and buffers. That was another concern that we had, was that not only putting in this right-of-way, so taking it from a 20-foot access easement, but then adding setbacks and buffers from that would seriously eat up the parcel. And so we've said no buffers are required and a 5-foot setback would be required. And then the last part of that is to establish that the minimum right-of-way that we could accept would be that 30-foot right-of-way that Jeff described earlier under the Historic Neighborhoods Preservation Overlay District amendments, that we would accept a minimum right-of-way of 30 feet where physical and property constraints exist, that this would allow the town engineer to accept that. And I would say in the majority of the situations that we've looked at, there are physical and property constraints there because the property's already been developed. So those are the amendments in a nutshell. So again, density would be grandfathered to what existed before the right-of-way is established. The setback will only be 5 feet from that newly established right-of-way. There would be no buffer along the newly created right-of-way. And the minimum right-of-way that could be accepted would be 30 feet. And I'd be happy to answer any questions related to this.
Thanks. Mike, you have questions? Can't hear you.
I think it's a well thought out plan, and I'm okay with it.
Okay, thanks. Todd?
Terry, the only question I had is, since we allowed, I believe we allowed 24-foot for
Yes.
single drive, would that need
One
to be
way.
incorporated into here?
We could definitely consider incorporating that in. I know that there are some roads that we've looked at that could potentially benefit from a one-way loop versus a two-way. So yes, I'll add that in.
The only thing I would caution, I was just thinking of this, is when you start getting very tight like that, is just making sure, and obviously that comes at the permit level reviews, is that vehicular circulation works within those confinements. You know, if it's a driveway and a vehicle has to back out of a driveway or something like that, it could get to a point where you can't maneuver a car within those limitations.
I understand.
Just a question that I have, is there a mapping of the unpaved dirt roads or in town that qualify, or is it just merely comparing it to this criteria in here?
No, so the town maintains a list of dirt roads, and then those roads can go on that list if they meet the criteria. And the criteria is listed on starts on page 13 and 14. So it has to serve more than 5 dwelling units. The property owners must express interest in that public road right-of-way. We have to have 100% participation in wanting that right-of-way or wanting the dirt road to be paved and turned into a right-of-way. The land must be donated to the town.
Is there a point in time that the dirt roads would not apply to a new subdivision underneath the standards that we're considering for the overlay district, right?
Well, it potentially could now it could in the family subdivision when there was a proposal to change that back to a 20-foot access easement. Now that it's going to be a 30-foot right-of-way, it would already be established as a right-of-way.
Right. So this is really pretty much dealing with the roads that are out there right now.
That's correct.
Okay. That was my only question. Any further comments or discussion? The committee feel that we're ready to move this up to the Planning Commission? We do? Can I hear a motion? Motion from Mike. Is there a second?
I'll move that we forward this up to the full commission.
All right. And a second.
Include the update for the 24-foot.
Yeah, and the 24 one-way, yeah.
And I'll second that.
All right. Roll call, please.
Mr. Scanlon,
Yes.
Mr. Theodore,
Yes.
Ms. McGowan.
Yes. I'm assuming, Teresa, there's no further business?
That's correct, Madam Chair.
No further business. Thank you for the time, everybody's time and input, including those of you who are not necessarily on this committee, but are giving your time. Thank you. With no further business, the meeting's adjourned.
Thank you. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.